Yay.
We refer to that as our Zoom collect. So. Well, if you want to go ahead and get started, there may be other people that join us as we move along here. So.
Okay. I didn't do a fancy PowerPoint, but I have an outline that I thought it might be helpful to share. So Larry contacted me because he had heard about the work of the Albany Presbytery Immigration Network. So that's what I'm going to be addressing in these opening few minutes of our conversation. And I want to start with a caveat, which is that when I say that the network does things, we need to keep in mind that that's what it is. It's a network. So very often when I say the network does things, what I mean is that some node in the network is doing something, and there's really no central body for the network to take collective responsibility. But there are some things that the network is responsible for collectively, and that's what I've listed at the beginning here. First of all, we have myself and another person serve as co-coordinators of the network. We are formally a part of or a subgroup of the mission committee of Albany Presbytery. The network began in 2017. Of course, the election in 2016 brought a lot of attention to immigration issues, and a lot of people, both within and outside the church, were thinking about how immigration in our country and in our region needed to be addressed. So I was contacted by a member, the pastor of the Troy First United Church, to see if she thought we might start up a network that would be especially looking at concerns regarding immigration within Presbytery and beyond. So it began in June of 2017. Very informally, we just put out an invitation. Anybody who's interested in participating in this network, please sign up on our email list. And one of the things that we do now is just to stay in touch with each other, share news items by way of a e-news list, and also by means of the Presbytery website. One thing that we were able to do through Presbytery that might not have happened if we had not formed the network is that we requested that Presbytery join the New York Immigration Coalition, which some of you may be familiar with, but it's a statewide advocacy body on immigration issues. As you'll see here, it costs, they have a sliding scale for membership according to the size of the budget of the organization that's applying. And in the case of Albany Presbytery, that comes to $290 a year for annual dues. But we do find that in plugging us into advocacy opportunities and the sharing of information that's useful to members of Presbytery, that the membership is very worthwhile. In addition to asking Presbytery to join the New York Immigration Coalition, we also, from time to time, ask Presbytery to take certain actions with regard to immigration. So, for instance, we asked Presbytery to sign on to what's known as the International Sanctuary Declaration, and Presbytery did so, and that put us in touch with another group, which is, as the name would imply, an international group. I meet with those folks on a monthly basis now. It's a very interesting group, mostly folks from the United States, from Canada, from Germany, and also there's one person who participates regularly who's in a refugee camp in the Western Sahara. So it's very interesting to get the international perspective on immigration through that participation. We also, and of course, this comes with the understanding that what we do under COVID has been different from what we do pre-COVID, what we did pre-COVID, but especially pre-COVID, we organized programs in the community and for Presbytery on a variety of topics. We had an Immigration 101 presentation from a immigration attorney. We had a special program on unaccompanied minors in the immigration system. And we've had a couple of presentations by resettlement agencies in our area, including USCRI, which is based in Albany, and HIAS, the Jewish Refugee Organization, which is actually their nearest headquarters is in Massachusetts, but since Albany Presbytery borders on New England, we invited somebody from HIAS to come and talk about their work. We also, through Presbytery, are connected with mission partners. I'll mention a number of other partners as I get into talking about congregational activity, but at the Presbytery level, one mission partner in particular who is funded by Presbytery, that is, we contribute to their funding, is Rural and Migrant Ministry, and they've been an important ally in programming and information sharing. But the real work of the network is understandably based in the work of congregations. So I just picked a few out here to give you an overview of the variety of activities that congregations are involved in. And I want to start with the obvious concept that, although it sounds ironic, I guess, to say it, immigration begins at home. And that is that one of the immediate issues relating to immigration for our congregations is, what about members of our congregations who are themselves immigrants? And there are two interesting instances of that among several within Albany Presbytery. The first two congregations I've listed here, Westminster Presbyterian Church in Albany and the Korean Presbyterian Church in Schenectady. In the case of Westminster, it just happened that a number of people from West Africa were settling in the Albany area. And these are people who already had, from their home country, Presbyterian affiliation, including a number from Ghana. So Westminster Presbyterian Church currently has a very large contingent of members from Ghana, and they have, I would say, not just integrated members, the Ghanaian members into the congregation, but actually expanded forms of worship and ways of doing things that also reflect the experiences of the Ghanaian members. So they have, I think it's now every month, they have a worship service in a mode that the Ghanaian members are familiar with. They also have a very active mission program where members of their church go to Ghana and engage in various mission projects, including bringing financial support to the Presbytery of Ghana. Also, because Westminster Presbyterian Church is in Albany, they are at the center of a refugee resettlement effort headed up by USCRI, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And I know that you folks in Utica are in an area where there's been a lot of refugee resettlement, so you're probably already familiar with this kind of effort. But with the recent influx of Afghan refugees in the Albany area, USCRI began a family sponsorship program, and Westminster Presbyterian Church has adopted one of those families to sponsor. They also have a member of the congregation is a lawyer with immigration law experience, and she wanted to start up a legal clinic, and with the assistance of a local attorneys organization called the Legal Project. That legal clinic has now been launched, and in fact, they just recently ran a series of clinics for the Afghan refugees who were coming into the area to review the various kinds of immigration allowances that they might be eligible for. The Korean Presbyterian Church is in a different situation because, unlike in the case of the Ghanaians at Westminster Presbyterian, these were people from another country coming into a congregation where there are already members native to the US. The Korean Presbyterian Church is really a congregation founded by immigrants from Korea, and they retain very much their mode of worship, in fact, in the Korean language. So the challenge here in terms of integration is not so much integrating immigrants into a larger congregation, but rather immigrating an immigrant congregation into the life of Presbytery. And we've approached that in two ways primarily. One is by making sure that our rotation of Presbytery meetings includes meetings held at the Korean Church. And then we've also reached out to the Korean congregation through the nominating committee of Presbytery to make sure that members of their congregation serve on various committees within Presbytery. First United Presbyterian Church in Troy, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the founding congregations of the immigration network. They have been very much involved with the local ally non-sectarian group called the Troy Sanctuary Movement. Again, in terms of sponsorship, the Troy Sanctuary Movement sponsors local immigrant families, does rendsizing, offers other kinds of support for them, but also through advocacy. The Rensselaer County, where Troy is located, is a very unfriendly county toward immigrants. The Rensselaer County Sheriff is the only sheriff in New York State who has a 287G contract with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But the First Presbyterian Church mission team, in collaboration with the Troy Sanctuary Movement, has spoken out in opposition to some of these anti-immigrant policies that have been promulgated at the level of the county government. The United Presbyterian Church of Cambridge, New York, is in a very rural area, and their work with immigrants exemplifies the work that can be done with migrant workers, especially, but not just migrant workers, but dairy workers, for instance, are not necessarily migrant. They live in the area year round, but they are farm workers living in very isolated situations. And the Good Neighbors program, based at the United Presbyterian Church in Cambridge, does outreach to those farm workers, just has social events to help bring them into community with each other and with the larger community, and then provides various kinds of services. For instance, a dental clinic from time to time has been sponsored by Good Neighbors, and they run a transportation program because there's very little public transportation in the area around Cambridge. And so drivers volunteer just to take people to shop for groceries, to get to medical appointments and that kind of thing. The Presbyterian New England Congregational Church in Saratoga Springs is my congregation. We got involved, first of all, in immigration support by deciding in 2017 that we wanted to be a sanctuary church. That is, we were willing to offer space in our church for somebody who needed to come into sanctuary because they might be at risk of imminent deportation. As it turned out, we have not actually had formally somebody who was in sanctuary, but we have had a number of asylum seekers or people who, for various reasons regarding their immigration status, needed a place to stay. And currently, we are housing a asylum seeker from Nigeria and a family from the Ukraine in a separate building on the church property. One of our main allies has been LifeWorks Community Action, the community action agency for Saratoga County. They have an immigrant services program, and they have worked very closely with the church and with the group that I've listed at the bottom here, the Saratoga Immigration Coalition, to provide services to immigrants in our area. The Saratoga Immigration Coalition includes one other congregation, the Unitarian congregation in Saratoga Springs, which has declared itself as a sanctuary congregation, but then 6 other faith communities who don't feel that they can actually offer physical sanctuary, but want to support the effort and support immigrants in general in our community. So that's been a major way in which our local congregation in Saratoga Springs has extended its involvement in the community. And again, all of these and other congregations that are involved in immigration support work within Presbytery stay in touch with each other through the communications network provided by the Presbytery Immigration Network. So I think I'm going to stop there. That just gives you, again, an instance of the variety of activities that we've been involved in. I hope I also was able to give you some idea of the difference made by the existence of the network. But I'll just stop there and ask if you have questions. Maybe I'll stop sharing so we can get back to our full faces here. And I welcome questions, comments. I'd also like to hear more about what is going on in Utica area, because I see a lot from time to time in the papers about the refugee resettlement effort that's going on here. I don't know what sort of difference that's making for Presbytery.
I was going to ask, has your group out there, or the Immigration Coalition and all them, have they done anything with the Utica crowd at all, or is any kind of coordination or sharing of information and such?
We haven't directly. I sit in on meetings of, there's a Central New York group that meets, I think maybe every other month, something like that. And I've just to try to keep up the networking, I've sat in on their meetings, but we haven't had direct relations with either refugee resettlement in the Utica area or with congregations within Presbytery, for that matter.
Refugee resettlement in Utica is done through the auspices of the center, which is the former Mohawk Valley Resource Center for Refugees. I just came from their Zoom board meeting, and you may have run into Shelley Callahan, the executive director, at one of those Central New York meetings.
How are things going with refugee resettlement? The press coverage makes it all seem very, very positive. Have you had an influx of Afghan refugees?
That was one of the things Shelley reported out on today. There are about, I think, just south of 80 Afghan parolees, I think is the right term the government's been using for them. I think the refugee center has found them to be a somewhat difficult group of clients to work with. Refugee resettlement, by and large, in Utica is done directly by the Refugee Center and typically is not done by churches or other community groups other than family reunification cases where the Refugee Center provides resource and support to the family resettling a family member who's joining them. So, so far this year, the Refugee Center has settled, I think, a little over 50 either refugees or, again, Afghan parolees. At the height of resettlement, prior to the last administration, you know, the center was settling 500 to 600 a year. So we live in different times.
Right, right.
There are also about 10 families who have welcomed Afghan or Ukrainian family members into their homes and into the community. And the Refugee Center is also resourcing those families.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you not say, or maybe it was someone else, but I recall hearing that Utica has one of the biggest Ukrainian populations in the United States?
Upstate New York does, and Utica has a significant Ukrainian population. I think Buffalo may have numerically and probably percentage wise larger population.
Are there Ukrainian churches in the area?
There is, yeah, and which has been, I think, kind of a nexus of community organizing, and they're famous for their Lenten pierogi sales. And this year, the pierogi sales have sold out. You can't buy a good pierogi because so many people want to support their efforts, and 100% of the monies that they're raising are going to Ukrainian relief.
They also have Russian.
That's Saint Vladimir Church.
In the Albany area, it's been, there are actually 3 Ukrainian churches in the immediate capital district. And then there's also a Ukrainian community center that's been a major source for trying to work with people who are beginning to come in now from Ukraine.
I know in Utica, I don't know if this is the case in Albany, folks who are working in refugee resettlement are now trying to figure out exactly how the administration is planning to manage the offer of 100,000 has been made by the president. It seems to me that it will probably follow a similar pattern to the Afghanis who came to the U.S.
You mentioned that word parolee with regard to the Afghans, and that actually is a very significant term in terms of the additional complications regarding people under that designation. Although we tend to call all these folks refugees, most resettlement agencies are used to working with refugees who actually have formal refugee status, which means that they've already been approved as refugees before coming into this country. And the parolees are coming in under humanitarian parole in order to get them in quickly, but it's just a temporary status. So that's one reason I mentioned that the Westminster Church in Albany was holding these legal clinics, because they needed to review what the status of the Afghan parolees was, and what kinds of claims they might have to acquiring a more regular status. So it's a different right from the start, in terms of legal issues, it's a different situation from the refugees that have been coming in under other circumstances.
You're exactly right. It's the humanitarian parolees, either from Afghanistan or the Ukraine, are admitted to the United States, and then their long-term status supposedly will be determined by the government within a 2-year period. Some other questions then follow from that. Do they have the right to work? Do they have a green card? A whole host of issues. And just the reality that while they're out of a war zone, their long-term future is still very much up in the air and tenuous. Psychologically, the impact of that is significant.
One of the things that we found to be an obviously important factor, especially for helping refugee families, is working with the school systems. Albany actually has its own international school because they have so many people from other countries, many of whom do not speak English, that they've set up a separate school to at least to begin to integrate children into the regular school system. But it's a place where special services can be provided for English language learning, instructions, and so on. And then ultimately they move on to the regular schools depending on where they live. But even during COVID, of course, there was also the challenge where so many schools were on distance learning, and immigrant families were finding an extra challenge in trying to figure out even the technology that was necessary for distance learning. So that's been an important support effort on the part of immigration support.
One of the unique things about Utica is that is the diversity that you find within the schools and the number of languages, mother tongues, so to speak, spoken by students in the schools. And at this point, the city of Utica, which is just above 60,000 in population, is just slightly below 20% non-native born residents. So Utica is probably one of the most diverse places you'll find, certainly in the Northeast, but anywhere in the US.
Are these folks finding their ways into established churches such as those of Utica Presbytery? Are they starting their own religious groups, or what's happening in that regard?
Do you want me to continue to answer here, Larry? I don't mean to dominate the conversation. All sorts of things.
Kind of our resident authority here. So.
all sorts of things are happening. They are some of them come with a strongly established, or many of them come with a strongly established religious identity. In Utica now, there are at least two, there may be a third Bosnian mosques because of early Bosnian resettlement. There's a former Episcopal church that's now a Vietnamese Buddhist temple. There's a significant Vietnamese population at one of the Roman Catholic churches. There are almost 5,000 people from Burma in Utica. There's an American Baptist church, which is historically Euro-American, that now is largely folks from Burma. There are several Burmese Protestant congregations of a variety of denominations, some newly established, or most of them newly established. The local Episcopal Church has a significant Karen Burmese population. There are Somali Bantus. There are, I'm trying to think of some of the smaller groups. There are there's a Hindu group in Utica now that every year celebrates Diwali. There's a huge Russian Pentecostal church in the north end of Utica, which is the result of almost an entire community in Russia of Pentecostals making their way to the U.S. and Utica under the Lautenberg refugee resettlement process.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And I'm certain I've left out a ton of examples.
Certainly creates a rich environment for interfaith work.
Well, and there's a former Presbyterian church in Utica that now is a mosque largely comprised of folks from Burma again.
You're right, Terry. We have a rather robust interfaith community that has developed here. So.
Terry, are you at all familiar with any of the business coming before General Assembly and the Immigration Policy Committee this year?
Actually, I'm not aware of things coming from that committee. Could you inform me?
Maybe. It's one of those that until committee discusses it, I'm never sure what's open discussion and what isn't, although okay. I guess several are actually referrals and recommendations from the previous General Assembly. Okay. But one of the, well, two the main ones I think germane to this conversation are the establishment by the denomination of a pro bono legal organization to help provide those kinds of resources to people who are newly entered or newly entering, given the overwhelm that the current court system has been facing. And another is to discuss and debate declaring the denomination itself to be a sanctuary and accompaniment denomination.
So I have seen that. I think I've actually seen both of those mentioned through Presbytery Peace Fellowship.
Probably, yeah.
Publicity.
Yeah. Right now, there's only a handful of items of business before that committee. So, Larry, it's been pretty easy for me to prepare for my General Assembly work coming up in that sense. I don't have 18 to 20 different things that I'm trying to become familiar with, but to me, they seem to be very broad and, while foundational, also fairly general. So the real curiosity that I'm having is what we may or may not do with any of these on a local boots on the ground kind of effort, whether that's Utica, Albany, both, all. I don't know. Those dots haven't been connected for me yet.
Right.
But.
Well, the pro bono legal assistance is certainly something that can be done on the local level. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I mentioned in connection with the congregation in Albany. And, you know, legal assistance obviously is crucial in supporting immigrants. So that's been a big part of our network activity, is when we work with immigrants, is just knowing, you know, who's available that we might refer to for legal assistance.
Mhm.
So we don't have to wait for the GA to take action on that to
Right.
to get something done.
Right.
Although I would assume that it has the GA proposal probably has some financial implications that I'm sure will be carefully scrutinized.
Yeah.
I
imagine that those will be logistics that we ultimately discuss in committee as we make recommendations.
So are you on that committee?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yep. And I went ahead and I looked up who, if there's anyone from Albany on that committee as well. And Rachel Maston was the name that came up.
Oh, okay, good.
So.
Yeah, I know Rachel.
Okay. I don't yet, but I'm sure I will.
Terry, this has been really rich. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you email me that document that you displayed and I'll send it out to the group?
Sure, I will do that. And I want to thank you. It's been a good two-way conversation. I've learned a lot about what's going on in your area, and certainly the suggestion that the two presbyteries might continue in dialogue and have some, figure out how we could cooperate in these areas would be a good thing to think about.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon us to see what dialogue can be had and do everything we can do to perpetuate it. So,
right.
So, Terry, is there a prayer you might want to offer for us on the way out?
Be happy to. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to be in fellowship by these strange new technological means. And we know that this fellowship is supported by the Spirit that has always been provided through your love. We ask that your love be extended to those who are coming into our country as immigrants, as refugees, that we recognize the fellowship that extends worldwide for all of your children. And we give thanks for the love that you have shown to us through your Son, Jesus Christ. And it is in his name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Friends, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Bye now.